Hello students, today we are going to have a demonstration about how to do practical work on craniometry. Craniometry is the science which deals with the scientific way of taking measurements on the human cranium. The human cranium for the students and researchers on anthropology is an important area of study, not just for the comparative anatomy purpose, but also from the point of view of evolutionary biology, where we can see the amount of changes that have occurred in the whole process of evolution to attain this particular structure of the human cranium that we currently have. The human cranium can be divided into two parts, one which is called the facial portion and the other is the cranium or the neurocranium. The neurocranium is composed of mainly the frontal bone, which we have on the front side of the skull, then the two parietal bones and one occipital bone, and in addition we have the temporal, ethmoid and the sphenoid bones. On the frontal facial part, we have bones like the maxilla, the zygomatic, the nasal bones, the vomer, the palatine, which forms the roof of our mouth, the vomer bone, and the mandible, which is the only movable bone in the human cranium. Different instruments are also used for taking different measurements, and a description of the instruments are given.
Sliding caliper. The sliding caliper is used for measuring breadth of short distance. The fixed and sliding arm have both sharp and blunted edge. The sharp edge and blunted are for measurement on skeleton and living human being respectively. The spreading calipers are made in two sizes. The first one is of 35 centimeters for taking the smaller measurement, and the another of 60 centimeters for taking measurements on pelvis, and hence it is also known as pelvimeter. It may further be noted that these spreading calipers of both the sizes are of two kinds, one with blunt or rounded edge and other with sharp pointed edge. The one with rounded edge are used for taking measurement on living subjects, while the caliper with sharp pointed end is used for taking measurement on the skeleton. The spreading calipers are normally used whenever the surface landmark are situated on curved or uneven surfaces. Unlike long bones, skulls have their own peculiar shape, and there is an essential need for their exact orientation. For this purpose, a special instrument called craniophore is used. It consists of a pair of jaws designed to be attached at the occipital foramen, one which remain in the outside and the other within the foramen. It also provides with a set of joints to allow the jaws bearing the skull to be moved in two directions at right angle with each other. These movements are necessary for purposes of orientation. It also required to be raised and lowered for giving a proper orientation to the skull. For the purposes of drawing skulls with the help of digraph, a special type of craniophore called cubic craniophore is used. It is the skeleton of the cube formed by the 12 metal bars. In the center of the cube, there is a accommodation for the skull holder. The skull is fitted with the skull holder at the foramen magnum. The holder is then fitted in the center of the craniophore. Its proper orientation is done with the help of a horizontal needle. In this manner, any desired aspects of cranium can be drawn with the help of a digraph. Goniometer. This instrument has round upper shape and bottom straight base. On the round shape, graduations are given in millimeter. It has a movable needle. A protector is attached to the base. The presence of slot with spring and screws allows the attachment with instrument like sliding or spreading calipers. Horizontal needle, it is a very convenient accessory instrument for the craniometric measurement. It consists of a small steel vertical metal rod on a heavy base. The upright rod has a socket which may be raised and lowered. A cross needle may be pushed in and out and can be fixed at a desired point. When a skull is clamped into a craniophore, this needle is helpful in orienting the skull in the Frankfurt horizontal plane. In all measurements of the girth and arc on the surface of the head and skull, the well-known measuring tape have been used. They are graded in millimeter and centimeters on both the sides. There are two types of tapes, one made of steel and the other plastic coated cloth tape. This image is of plastic coated cloth tapes. It is generally recommended that tapes must be checked at regular intervals. Thus, we can say that for all kind of girth measurement on the body or on the bones are done by the measuring tape.
Before taking measurements on the human cranium, we have to take note of this, that the skull has to be first oriented on the Frankfurt horizontal plane. The Frankfurt horizontal plane is achieved or is attained by the orientation of the points orbitally and the porian at the same level. The orbitally is the point which is described as the deepest point on the lower margin of the orbit, and the porian is the highest point on the upper margin of the external auditory meatus. To orient the skull on the Frankfurt horizontal plane, we have to first fix the skull on the tubular craniophore. This is the tubular craniophore on which the skull is mounted. It has the jaws which holds the skull in a firm position, and then we use another instrument which is called the horizontal needle, and the horizontal needle helps us to bring the skull to at the same level of the points orbitally and porian to the same level. So this is the orbitally, the deepest point on the lower margin of the orbit. So the two orbitally have to be at the same plane, and the third point is the porian, which is the highest point on the upper margin of the external auditory meatus. So for orienting the skull on the horizontal plane, we should have a minimum of the three landmarks, either the two porian or one orbitally, or two orbitally or one porian at the same level or the same plane. This is called the Frankfurt horizontal plane. After orienting the skull on the Frankfurt horizontal plane, different types of measurements can be taken on the cranium. We have linear measurements and angular measurements which can be taken from different landmarks on the cranium. Measurements can range like length measurements, breadth measurements, depth, height, chord, circumferential measurements, and arc measurements. We will now demonstrate how to take the linear measurement of maximum cranial length. So for this, we first have to orient the skull on the Frankfurt horizontal plane. and use the instrument spreading caliper. So the maximum cranial length is taken from the landmarks glabella to opisthocranium. Glabella is the most prominent point between the two supraorbital ridges on the mid-sagittal plane. The mid-sagittal plane is the plane which divides the skull into two parts, that is the left and the right part. So the glabella is the most prominent point between the two supraorbital ridges on the mid-sagittal plane, and after locating the glabella, we hold the instrument with our right hand and identify the glabella point and hold that point with the tip of our forefinger, and with the other arm of the spreading caliper we have to move the point, because the opisthocranium is not a point but it is the part of the skeleton cranium which shows the maximum length. So we have to slide the caliper arm up and down to see the point where we have the maximum dimension. So that is identified as the opisthocranium. So the measurement maximum cranial length is taken from the glabella to the opisthocranium.
Glabella union length. It measures the straight distance from the glabella to the union. Union, it is the most prominent point on the external occipital protuberance in the mid-sagittal plane. The instrument used for this particular measurement is the spreading caliper. The skull is placed on a craniophore in a norma lateralis position. The glabella is touched by the pointed top of the left arm of the caliper, and in that position the right arm is moved to place its pointed end on the union, which lies in the mid-sagittal plane. So this is all about the measurement of glabella union length. The third measurement is Nazian union length. It measures straight distance from the Nazian to the union. So let's see the definition here for the Nazian. So the Nazian is the meeting point of the frontonasal and internasal suture. If this juncture is not in the mid-sagittal plane, then the mid-sagittal plane of the frontonasal suture is taken as the Nazian. So here also the instrument used for this particular measurement is spreading caliper, and this method is similar to that used in the measurement of glabella union length. That means here also we have to place the skull on a pad in a normal lateralized position, facing the left side upward for taking this particular measurement. So this is all about this Nazian union length measurement. The fourth measurement is the length of foramen magnum. So it measures the straight distance from the Bayesian to the opisthean. So first let's see the definition for these two particular landmarks, that is Bayesian and opisthean. So Bayesian, it is the lowest point on the external surface of the anterior margin of the foramen magnum in the mid-sagittal plane, whereas this the opisthean, it is the point in the mid-sagittal plane on the posterior margin of the foramen magnum. So for this particular measurement, the instrument used is sliding caliper. For taking the measurement, first the skull is allowed to rest with its norma basalis position facing the upwards. Then the end of the fixed crossbar is placed against one point, and then the movable crossbar is slided over to touch the other point. So this is all about the measurement of length of foramen magnum.
So next we will be taking a breath measurement. So for this we will be demonstrating the maximum cranial breadth, and the breadth is taken as a transverse distance from the mid-sagittal plane. So for this we use the instrument spreading caliper, and the maximum cranial breadth is taken from the landmarks urine to urine. The urine is the lateral-most point on the lateral walls of the cranium. This can be identified, the urine points can be identified by placing the spreading caliper and taking circular motions or linear motions where the point where we have the maximum breadth that is taken as the urine point.
Bizygomatic breadth. It measures the straight distance from one zygote to the other zygote. Zygote is the most lateral point of the zygomatic arc. For this particular measurement, sliding caliper is used, and before taking this measurement, the skull is allowed to rest on its base facing to the investigator. The two ends of the caliper are moved forwards and backwards on the two zygomatic arches to obtain the maximum value. We have to take care of a following thing while taking this particular measurement, that is the two ends of the instrument should be always in one horizontal plane and the joint of it in the mid-sagittal plane. So this is all about the measurement of bizygomatic breadth. Breadth of foramen magnum. The measurement gives the maximum breadth of the foramen magnum. For this particular measurement, sliding caliper is used. Before taking the measurement, first we have to allow the skull to rest with its norma basalis facing the upwards. Then the breadth is taken at the right angle to the length by touching the most lateral margins of the foramen magnum with the two ends of the caliper. Palatal breadth. It measures the straight distance from one endomalar to the other. For this particular measurement, sliding caliper is used. Before taking the measurement, first the skull is allowed to rest on the cushion facing norma basalis upwards. Then the end of the fixed crossbar is placed against one of the endomalar, and then the other crossbar is moved to touch the other endomalar point. Bigonial breadth. It measures the straight distance between the two gonian points. Gonian, it is the most posterior, inferior and lateral point of the angle of the lower jaw or mandible made by the basal margin of the body and posterior margin of the ramus. For this particular measurement, sliding caliper is used. Before taking this measurement, first we have to place the mandible inverted on the cushion and adjust the inner border of the crossbar of the caliper on the lateral surface of the caliper. Then we have to place the end of the fixed crossbar against the most laterally placed point of one of the gonian. Slide of the movable crossbar to the other gonian to take the measurement.
So this time we'll take a height measurement. So there are different height measurements that we can take on the facial region, like the upper facial height, nasal height, orbitally height. So we will start show the how to take the upper facial height. The landmarks used for the upper facial height are the nasion and the prostean. The nasion is the point of where the internasal suture meets the frontonasal suture and on the mid-sagittal plane, and the prostean is the point where the intermaxillary, lower point of the intermaxillary suture on the alveolar margin in between the two middle incisors. So we used a sliding caliper for taking this measurement. So the upper arm of the sliding caliper is at the Nazian point and the lower is at the Prostian point. The reading maximum upper facial height has to be read on the scale which is on the sliding caliper.
Nasal height. It measures the straight distance from the Nazian to the nasospinal. Sliding caliper is used for this particular measurement. For taking the measurement, first the sharp end of the fixed crossbar is placed on the Nazian and then the movable crossbar is slided so that its end touches the nasospinal. Height of ramus. It measures the straight distance between gonion and the highest point on the mandibular capitulum. Gonion, it is the most posterior, inferior and lateral point of the angle of the lower jaw or mandible met by the basal margin of the body and posterior margin of the ramus. For taking this particular measurement, the instrument sliding caliper is used. Before taking the measurement, first we have to place the fixed end of the crossbar on the top of the condyle, then adjust the movable crossbar on the gonion, and in that way we are able to read the measurement.
Another type of measurement that can be taken on the cranium is the chord measurement. There are various chord measurements that we can take, like the frontal chord, the parietal chord and the occipital chord. So the chord measurements are generally taken between two landmarks with the help of a sliding caliper. For example, we have the frontal chord, the parietal chord and the occipital chord. The frontal chord is taken from the Nazian to the bregma, and the parietal chord is from the bregma to the lambda, and the occipital chord is from the lambda to the opistheal. So we will demonstrate how to take the parietal chord. The bregma point is the meeting point of the coronal suture and the sagittal suture on the mid-sagittal plane. The coronal suture is between the frontal and the two parietal bones, and the sagittal suture is between the two parietal bones. So the meeting point of the coronal and the sagittal suture on the mid-sagittal plane is the point of bregma. So we place one arm of the sagittal sliding caliper on this point and take the other slide the other to the point of the lambda, which is the meeting point of the lambdoidal suture and the sagittal suture. The lambdoidal suture is between the occipital and the two parietal bones. So this straight distance is the parietal chord. The length of the parietal chord is read on the marks which are given on the bar of the sliding caliper. The arc measurement is taken between the landmarks which are the same as that of the chords, but the difference here is that we used a measuring tape instead of the sliding caliper. So the arc measurement is taken over the surface of the cranium or the skull. So for the parietal arc, we have the landmarks which we had discussed for the parietal chord, that is the bregma to the lambda, but we take the measurement with the help of a measuring tape over the surface of the cranium.
Transverse cranial arc. It measures the arc distance from one porion to the other over the bregma. This measurement is done through a tap. For taking the measurement, first the skull is kept on a pad with its norma verticalis facing upwards. Then the 0 point of the tap is placed on the left porion by the left thumb, and then the tap is pulled over the bregma to the right porion to obtain the measurement. Mid-sagittal cranial arc. It measures the arc distance between the Nazian to the opistheal. tape is used for this particular measurement. The measurement is taken in the mid-sagittal plane. From the nasion, the tape is extended to the ophisthion over the cranium. So this is the procedure for taking the measurement of mid-sagittal cranial arch.
The horizontal circumference of the head is also a measurement which is taken with a measuring tape, and this horizontal circumference is taken from the glabella over the ophistocranium to the glabella. So this gives us the horizontal circumference of the head. Now we'll learn about how to take angular measurements on the skull. So for taking angular measurements, we need the instruments of sliding caliper and another instrument which is known as the goniometer. This is a protector with a movable needle and a heavy base which has to be attached to the sliding caliper, and there are screws to which allows it to be fixed to the sliding caliper, and this is known as the attachable goniometer. So with this goniometer and the sliding caliper attached, we take the angular measurements on the skull. So there are various measurements that we need to take on the skull, like the metopic angle, nasal profile angle, facial profile angle, alveolar profile angle. So these are taken from the landmarks which are different for different measurements, but one thing is the universal for all is that the skull has to be oriented on the Frankfurt horizontal plane. So before starting the measurements, we had oriented the skull on the Frankfurt horizontal plane, that is also known as the eye-ear plane, where the points orbitally and the porion have to be brought to the same level. So this is a skull which has already been oriented on the Frankfurt horizontal plane, and we will show how to take first the metopic angle. So the metopic angle, the landmarks used for the metopic angle are the metopian and the nasion. So how do we identify the metopian point? The metopian point is identified on the basis of the frontal arc, which is taken, the measurement which is taken from the nasion to the bregma. So this is the frontal arc we measure with the measuring tape. So from the nasion to bregma, when we take the measurement here, it comes to be 13.3, and the metopian point is identified as the first 1/3 length of this frontal arc. So the point from the nasion to the first 1/3 here will come to be 13.3 divided by 3, which is equal to 4.4. So the length from the nasion to 4.4 would be our metopian. So the metopic angle is calculated as the straight line joining the metopian and the nasion, and this line will form an angle with the FH plane on which the skull is already oriented. So the metopian angle is calculated as the line joining the metopian and the nasion with that of the FH plane. So the movable needle of the goniometer will indicate the angle, and this can be read from the readings on the projector.
Facial profile angle, the angle formed by the nasion prostean line with the Frankfurt horizontal plane. The sharp end of the fixed crossbar of the sliding caliper is placed on the nasion, and then the movable crossbar is slided to touch the prostean point with the sharp end. The measurement is recorded from the reading on the goniometer. Alveolar profile angle. This angle should be measured only on those skulls which have complete alveolar region in the median plane. The alveolar profile angle indicates the inclination of the profile of the alveolar region over Frankfurt horizontal. The profile of the alveolar region is measured from the nasospinal to prosteal. The angle can be sought with the help of a satisfactory goniometer upon an oriented skull. Nasal profile angle. This angle is formed by the Nagian nasospinal line over the Frankfurt horizontal plane. It can be easily measured in an oriented skull with the stationary goniometer. The 2 points of the instrument rest on Nagian and nasospinal. The point nasospinal must be determined by drawing a line across the lower border of the nasal aperture tangent to the lateral curves at their lowest point and taking the point in this line where it crosses the mid-sagittal plane. Profile angle of the nasal roof. This angle measures the inclination of the Nagian-Rhenian line over Frankfurt horizontal. The points of the goniometer rest on termini of the line from Nagian to Rhenian. This measurement should be taken only on skulls having complete nasal bones.